give a big, warm welcome to Eliza Wild.
So I apologize if this is a little raw, but you guys are sitting in my first home in Akron, so I'm going to be a little raw. The first time I was raped, I was 14 years old, and it was my virginity, and the man that I was with consistently said, if you loved me but, if you loved me but, if you loved me but. The second time I was raped, I was 16 years old. I was trying to deal with what I didn't know was post-traumatic stress disorder, and was wasted, like I found myself oftentimes at that age. But this time I was in a cabin in Millersburg, Ohio, drinking shots of what I think was cinnamon schnapps, which, dear God, I will never drink again. In a hot tub, in the middle of winter, naked. Woke up and had not known, only had glimpses of what had happened. When I was 18, I was in my very first psychology class, even though my father is a psychologist. And I had never heard the different forms of rape. And when they talked about date rape, I started to cry. And this is, you know, not to give away my age or anything. This was with all the lights out and the overhead projector, and we were all taking notes. But the thing was that when the teacher turned on the lights, there were 5 other girls in a room of 20 people crying. And then I started thinking about all of the women that I'd grown up with and known very well. And I realized very quickly in that my very small, seemingly quaint town of mostly evangelicals of Dover, that every girl I grew up with had been raped or at the very least sexually assaulted. And I vowed then and there to try and do something to change that. So I went to school. And when I went to college, I decided to go to Kent State University because there was a long line of people standing up for themselves there. And my first, my first 2 weeks at Kent State, I quickly found out that I was pregnant. I did not want the child. This was my out of my abusive little messed up town, even though my parents were generally the safe place in that. And I decided to have an abortion. And I've always wanted kids. Always. So my sister, who used to do escorting at the Women's Health Clinic in Cleveland, which is now shut down, thank you, Right to Life, took me to the clinic and was able to pay for my procedure. She was there. My partner at the time was there because he was supportive of whatever my decision was. And I was having a really hard time with it. I had to walk through the picket line to get into the clinic. And I've always wanted kids, so I had a hard time with it. And when I went through the procedure, my sister held my hand the entire time, was telling me jokes until I went under, like a good sister does. And when I woke up, they told me all the things that I needed to do. Half of that information actually consciously went through. And I was still having all of this anxiety about me. And it was this weird combination of walking through that picket line and this like shouting of guilt being thrown at you and the sense of like, I do want kids someday, adding up to me. And I walked out of that waiting room and I just started crying. And when I got into that waiting room, it was filled with African American women that were there waiting for daughters, granddaughters, nieces, best friends' children. And they all stood up and gave me a hug and said, "You made the right decision. You're only just a baby yourself." And that was the first time since before I was raped that I felt safe. So I quickly started taking Pan-African Studies classes at Kent State and studying African American women and African American women movements. And that is where I continually find strength and home. And a bunch of my friends from the Pan-African Studies department decided to start this wonderful place called the Way of Mind and Body in Akron because they decided that they couldn't just take this knowledge and not do something with it. And when they started the womb, it was the first place since high school that I started to read poetry. It was where I started to find my voice. And after my third assault, it was where I started to get community organizing skills and started moving a community. And while you see all of these terrible things in the media about the Black community being terrifying and horrible, the reality is that they are more loving and more caring and take care of one another than these suburban, well-to-do communities will ever know. And I'm honored that I've been able to be considered one of. And I'm thankful to have been able to find home and be allowed to be here. Thank you.